My true story from Virginia. I came home on Christmas morning and found my husband in bed with my daughter-in-law. They thought I'd cry. I just walked back out and came back with the deed, the lawyer, and the locksmith. On Christmas morning I arrived home before dawn, my heart still warmed from the midnight service at St. Mark's Church, where I'd volunteered every holiday season, hands aching from passing out blankets and hot cocoa to the lonely souls bussed in from the county shelter. The sky had turned that pale blue you only find in the dead of winter, and the snow on my car looked like fine dust settling over the world. I carried in my arms a brown paper bag of homemade sugar cookies, each one rolled with care and shaped like tiny stars, the scent of vanilla filling the crisp morning air. I unlocked the front door and stepped through the hallway, my slippers barely making a sound on the polished hardwood, but I knew that wind bells tinkled above the entrance and that someone was awake. I thought it was Alex, my son, stirring early to open presents, or perhaps the dog, padding downstairs for its breakfast. I set the bag down momentarily and paused, hearing voices rising from upstairs, voices that made my bones tense. I climbed the stairwell in 3 steps, my breath uneven in the silent house, and at the top a sliver of light leaked from our bedroom door. I stopped. I heard the heavy breathing, the familiar voice of my husband, but so different now. Rough, urgent, crude. My chest clenched, and the bag of cookies slipped from my hand so silently I barely registered the crumble of 1 sugar star against the wood. I opened the door slowly. He and she were there, my husband and my daughter-in-law, naked beneath a crimson quilt embroidered with holly and ivy, their bodies pressed together like an obscene Christmas tableau. They froze. Neither moved. I did not gasp. I did not scream. I did not ask them to explain. I simply stood, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight, watching them unravel the picture of our marriage. He blinked once, looked at me, and scoffed. "You thought I did not have feelings anymore?" he said, his voice cold, the quilt falling half to the floor. "I am a man. I have blood. I have flesh. You are like a mummy that breathes." He rose from the bed without attempting to cover himself, and I watched every inch of his arrogance, every flicker in his steel-gray eyes. She laughed softly, leaning back against him, her expression one of cruel amusement. "Do not be shocked, Mother," she said, voice equal parts honey and venom. "Some Christmas gifts are only for those young enough to enjoy them." He advanced toward me, spit in his tone, easy disdain in his posture. "She is the real woman, you are decaying, rotting, you look like a dead branch. Inside and out, my limbs ached, but I did not waver." She reached out, trailing her fingers along his chest as if posing for a holiday portrait. "You should be grateful you are still under this roof," she drawled. "But if you have any dignity left, perhaps you should leave." The silence stretched out. My breath, his breath, the quiet drip of condensation from the window. I did not cry. I did not plead or threaten. I turned slowly on my heel. My slippers slid unobtrusively across the rug. I shut the door behind me without locking it, and the click barely registered. I walked 3 slow steps back down the hall and paused outside the study. The parchment-lined walls were now gallery to holiday cards from church friends. I leaned against the doorframe, rested my cheek against cool wood, heard once more the rasp of breath from upstairs. I thought of Alex opening his childhood toys, of the red ribbons undone, of the laughter that should have filled this house on Christmas morning. I thought of my sugar cookies drying in the kitchen. Then, without a backward glance, I descended downstairs, each step measured. I made my way into the den, where I kept my coat and gloves, then slipped out the side door onto the porch, nose burning in the cold. Once outside, I looked up at the rooftops. The snow laden on the eaves, the sky turning from slate to steel and finally to pale dawn. I walked to the brick mailbox post at the end of the shoveled path, and under the lid of my handbag, I found the folder labeled Lawyer Deed Cam. I had kept those papers in reserve for months, afraid, yet ready, aware of their weight, but certain I might never need them. My breath misted in the air as I opened the folder and smoothed out the papers. The deed in my name alone, dated 25 years ago when Alex was born. The notarized affidavit confirming I had never signed any transfer. And the USB camera footage from the kitchen, where I had set up the little device last Thanksgiving after noticing some late-night glances between those two. My hands did not tremble. The sky overhead turned pink, and I felt a fierce calm settle in me. I slid the papers back inside the folder, zipped my coat tight, and walked to my car. I sat for a moment, iced windows reflecting the pale dawn and the still house behind me. I started the engine and drove to the lawyer's office 2 miles away, parking in the empty lot. The lights inside were warm, the receptionist surprised but not shocked when I walked in with a bag of Christmas cookies in hand. I closed the folder in front of the lawyer and nodded toward the USB device. He took it, eyes lifting from the screen as he watched the first seconds of footage, the camera angled at the kitchen window where I had once baked those cards and meals and shaped his family's traditions. He watched, expression tight. I left the cookies in a bowl on his desk and asked him to begin action immediately, lawsuit for trespass, for emotional distress, to enforce the deed and remove both trespassers from my home. He cleared his throat and said, "We will start today." I left with a file stamped urgent and walked to the locksmith next door. He was expecting me. Without explanation, I handed him the deed and the extra key. He said, "Ma'am, if you own this, I can rekey it today." I nodded. He looked relieved. "We will have them out by noon." I paid him. I walked out into the street again as the sun burned across the horizon. I felt the folder at my side like armor. No tears, no pleading, just truth and resolve. I got in my car and drove home, the locksmith's number saved in my phone. The snow crunched beneath the wheels. In the mirror, I saw my own reflection, lined, firm, eyes clear with purpose. They had thought I would cry. I had not. They thought I would beg. I had not. They thought I was powerless. But this house, this sanctuary built with my hands, was mine. And today, I reclaimed it. I was 22 when I met George. I was a part-time nurse in Charlottesville, fresh out of community college, working the night shift at the county clinic. He came in with grease on his hands and a cracked rib, laughing even as I wrapped his side. He had fallen off a customer's car lift, but he joked it was Cupid's arrow. George had nothing, no parents left, barely a high school diploma, and a rusted pickup that coughed every time it turned, but he looked me in the eye like I was worth something, and that was more than most men ever did. He proposed 6 months later on the sidewalk outside the same clinic. No ring box, just a silver aluminum washer tied to a shoelace, his hands shaking from nerves. I said yes. Of course I did. Love back then was not measured in diamonds or destinations. It was the way he touched my back when we crossed the street. It was how he waited up at 4 a.m. just to walk me home from the night shift. We started small, rented a 1-bedroom over a hardware store. I packed sandwiches every day while he worked on old trucks under the Virginia sun. By the time I was 27, we scraped enough together to open George's first garage. A leaky building on the edge of Route 29 with a crooked sign and no heat. I answered phones and cleaned tools in between bottle-feeding Alex. Our son was born on a Monday and George went back to work on Tuesday. No time off, no complaints. We bought this house when I was 33. 3 bedrooms. Wraparound porch, peach tree in the yard. The day we signed the deed, George held my hand and said, "We did this, baby, from nothing." He kissed the kitchen wall like it was holy. We were never rich, but we were rooted. I baked bread every Thursday, not because it was fancy, but because the smell made our house feel alive. Alex had a paper route by age 9 and straight A's by 12. I used to sit at the table with him every night, teaching long division and spelling words while George fixed brakes out back. And George, he changed too. His shoulders filled out, his confidence rose, people in town respected him. We started attending church more, hosting potlucks, being asked to speak about marriage at Sunday school. He was proud to have built a life from scratch, we both were, but life, it shifts. 2 years ago, I had a small stroke. It was not devastating, but it changed things. My words slurred a little, my hand trembled more than before. I could not knead dough the same, could not move fast enough to help in the garage. George started pulling away. At first, I thought it was grief or fear. He began coming home later. He snapped more. He stopped asking me to join him at the garage on Saturdays. Then came the sighs, the silent dinners, the way he looked past me as if I was a faded photograph in a frame no one dusted anymore. And then came Victoria, Alex's wife, a lawyer, sharp, stunning, always in heels and a perfect shade of lipstick. She smiled with her mouth, but not with her eyes. The first time I met her, she brought me flowers I was allergic to, then laughed when I sneezed. I told myself it was nerves, but it did not take long to see the cracks. She would correct my stories at dinner, laugh when I forgot a word. Once, I overheard her tell Alex in the kitchen, "If your mom gets any more confused, we'll have to keep knives out of reach." I wanted to believe it was just youth, that she did not mean it, that it was my stroke clouding things. But then, last spring, George began defending her, blindly, aggressively. When I misplaced my medication and found it in the trash, he said I was being paranoid. When I said she had taken my jewelry to get it cleaned, he said I was losing my memory. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, incidents. I kept a logbook in the drawer beneath my knitting yarn. I made copies. I started noticing when Victoria touched George's arm too long, when she stayed late after dinner while Alex worked nights, when they would go to get coffee and come back smelling like wine. 40 years I built this home, and in 2, they turned it into a house of ghosts. But I was not dead yet, and they had no idea what I remembered. Every bill I paid, every paper I signed, every cold look I tucked into my memory like pins on a map. Let them think I am soft. Let them forget that I was the one who built the ground they walk on, because nothing is quieter than a woman who remembers, and nothing more dangerous than a woman with the deed. It started calmly, shaped like goodwill but stung like betrayal. 2 winters after my stroke, Victoria began rearranging the house and our lives by stealth and ceremony. First, she helped me with bills, saying the snow and ice made paperwork dangerous. I nodded and continued knitting at the table, letting her pocket my glasses. Next came the residency card. "Mom, you should change the title of the house," Victoria said one evening as we sat at dinner. Her voice was as smooth as melted butter, but there was steel in her eyes. "It makes probate harder for Alex. If something happens to you unexpectedly, it will be simpler for him." Nothing about that line sat right. "Probate," she said, as though death were next week's errand. "Simpler," she dropped it, shaking her head gently. "You only need to sign. It is a transfer in trust, but you retain control until your will changes it again." I smiled, but inside something tightened. She spoke so earnestly, but I remembered the way George's smile tinged with caution whenever she looked at us both. When I asked, "What attorney is handling it?" she named a well-known estate planner, someone I trust. I left it there, setting the beans aside on my spoon, stirring with more care than I let show. The bills came next. Utilities, taxes, insurance. Victoria began placing them all in an envelope. She said it was to avoid late fees. Sometimes she signed Victoria. I saw those signatures in black ink, neat and exact. One week, the taxes were paid early. Another week, my vision drifted, and George handed her a check while I was lost in my knitting. He told me not to fuss. Around that time, I began hearing arguments when I entered the kitchen late. I would catch her voice high and clipped. "I told you 2 months ago, she needs to sign now." Then his, lower, "You are ungrateful." The kettle hissed. I turned and asked, "Dinner?" And they turned toward me, smiles exactly creased in place. So I acted, quietly. First, I installed the small camera in the corner of the kitchen, perched inside a biscuit tin. It recorded movement, but not heat, just grainy footage, enough to learn how they spoke to each other. Then I began a slim diary, red cover, gold lettering. Every dinner where Victoria hovered, every surprise late-night visit to the drawer of house documents. Every phone call during which George stood in the hallway, voice low, and hung up after 10 seconds. I paid the lawyer I trusted with cash from a secret savings account, funds set aside for emergencies decades ago. I said nothing to anyone. I asked quietly, "Could you get us the house title abstract? I want to see if anything is pending." I watched his face shift, catching a glimmer of alarm. The weekend after Christmas, I received the call. They found the title, not as I expected, with only my name, but with 2 names, mine and Victoria's. It read, "Titled in joint tenancy." They added, "We saw no paperwork from you. Mr. George consented privately. We can obtain copies." My hands shook. I asked for every notice, every form, every signed copy. They sent a large envelope in the mail. It was heavy. When I opened it, I found a stack of documents dated 6 months prior, under property transfer, trustee edition. Signatures, all in black ink and neat script. My signature on one page, apparently added by George's pen. Another signature, mine again, but on a trust agreement. The names matched, they said, but not the timeline. George had signed while I was recovering from the stroke. I felt my breath catch. I sat at the kitchen table, one of the 2 non-dairy coffees they let me have anymore, and stared at it all. How many meals had I quietly left for them? How many times had I stayed seated so they could pass by in front of me as though I were glass? My diary sparked to life in my mind. I flipped through pages where Victoria had asked for policy updates in my name, where she laughed at me when I fumbled reading a letter, where she said, "Trust me, this protects you." I was silent, but no longer passive. That night, after dinner, I walked by the kitchen and turned on the camera. Our old-fashioned kettle began brewing like a clock. I pretended to forget something in my room. I returned an hour later, alone. I kneeled down to collect the biscuit tin, disconnecting the USB cable with gloves over my hands, as if sweeping crumbs from a dining table. A humming recorder rested inside. I left no fingerprints. The next morning, I met with the lawyer again. I handed him the documents and added the video file. We watched it in his office together, Victoria gently guiding my hand across the transfer form, my face pale and hushed as she smiled, George standing behind her, nodding. That signature was mine, but I had never signed, or at least not knowingly. The paperwork had been switched, and the date of signature was when I was in rehab, sleeping through mornings. He looked at me with respect in his eyes. "We have enough," he said softly. "They tried to move quickly, but we were moving faster." I nodded. I felt a bitterness bloom. These were the people I had loved, supported, sheltered, celebrated, and now they had invented a world where I was a fool. Over the next weeks, appointments were made, notices sent. We prepared to file to remove her name, contest the trust and the transfer, and have the title returned to me alone. My case would argue undue influence, lack of capacity at time of signature, falsified documents. The lawyer said I had a strong case, but we still needed proof. So, we planned. I began wearing sweaters over my arms in photos, even indoors. I said nothing to Victoria when she complimented me on my new colors. I played along while my hair colored itself along the lines of gray. All the while, every late-night conversation and discreet cough in the hallway was logged in my red diary. One evening, Victoria trimmed me with a toast. "To our beautiful family," she said aloud. All heads lifted. I raised my glass faintly, and in my mind I said, "And to me, not you, actually." For months, I danced along the edges of their truth, but never enough for them to see. I moved with the quiet purpose of a ship crossing tides. 2 lives had built this house with me. Another life had begun unmaking it. My evidence was growing, and soon the walls would speak. One morning, the sky pale as chalcedony, I found them in the kitchen early. Coffee in hand, I stood at the threshold. Victoria flinched, George startled. "Good morning," I said. I did not ask where the papers were. I did not ask which signatures were real. I simply held my cup at chest height and counted my breaths. They did not speak, and as the kettle whistled, I lifted my chin and thought, when I walked in that bedroom months ago, I thought I would break. I thought I was powerless. I thought this house would swallow me like a lie. But now, with paper and proof and patient purpose, I remembered. The foundation I laid for 40 years was still under my feet. They had begun the scheme. Now I held the balance. I did not scream. I did not throw the tray. I did not weep in the hallway. Instead, I walked out of that bedroom on Christmas morning, leaving behind the scent of betrayal and the warmth of a bed that had once meant sanctuary. I stepped down each stair with my spine straight, my hand grazing the rail that George and I had painted 38 years ago. At the bottom, I paused, then turned into the kitchen. The lights were still on. The coffee pot clicked as it reheated its last brew. My tin of cookies had shattered on the tile, and a single oatmeal raisin lay at my feet like an offering no one wanted. I picked it up, brushed off the crumbs, set it gently on a plate. Then I pulled out my phone. My lawyer answered on the second ring. "It's happening," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Do you need me to come now?" he asked. "Yes. And bring the original documents, the ones with George's signature from the original deed. I need everything, today." He didn't ask questions. He knew. We had prepared for this moment for months. Suspicion had long turned to certainty. Betrayal had moved from shadow to spotlight. It was time. While he gathered the folders, I pulled open the drawer beneath the sink. Inside, a blue file marked Utilities had long since been repurposed. I removed it. Inside were printed stills from the hidden kitchen camera, dates and times marked, conversations transcribed. Victoria's voice on tape, pressing George. "If she signs this, she loses nothing, but if she doesn't, we lose everything." His response, "She won't notice. She's fading." Another page. "Victoria to Alex. If she ever finds out, you better be ready to put her in a home, the one where they don't let them back out." I had heard that and said nothing. Until now. I placed the file into my handbag. Then I took a deep breath and called the locksmith. "I need a full rekey. Every lock. The front, the back, garage, mailbox. Can you come today?" "Holiday surcharge? Bleh, I'll pay it." He was there in less than an hour. While he worked outside, I sat in the living room in my old green cardigan, knitting in my lap, heart silent. Upstairs I heard movement, footsteps, laughter. A low voice, hers, said, "She'll be crying in the basement." George replied something muffled. Then more laughter. The front door clicked open. My lawyer stepped in, coat dusted in snow, breath fogging from the cold. He carried a leather folder tucked tightly under his arm. "She was clever," he said as he opened the folder. "But not clever enough." He placed the documents on the table between us. George's signature on the original deed, dated 3 decades ago. Notarized. Exclusive ownership in my name only. No joint tenancy. No transfer of survivorship. The newer documents, filed quietly without my consent, had not been executed properly. In the eyes of the law, the house remained solely mine. I touched the edge of the page. "That's enough," I said. He nodded. "When do you want to proceed?" I smiled faintly. "Tonight, after dinner." By evening, the locks had been changed. My lawyer had emailed formal notice to George and Victoria, citing the discovery of fraudulent documents and revocation of all access pending legal review. I printed the letter and folded it into an envelope, writing their names in cursive. Upstairs, their celebration continued. I heard the clink of wine glasses. Victoria's voice sang out. "The old bat probably ran to church again. Bless her wrinkled soul." I placed the envelope at the foot of the stairs and returned to the living room. I waited. At 7:34 p.m., George came down first. He stopped when he saw me sitting there, calm and upright, fireplace lit. His eyes darted to the envelope. "What is this? Read it," I said. He opened it. Victoria arrived seconds later, her silk robe trailing. She looked at the envelope in his hands, then at me. "What's going on?" I pointed to the coffee table. "Those are the original documents. The house has always been in my name. It still is." George paled. "But we filed the transfer." "You filed a lie," I said, voice even, "and I have the proof." Victoria reached for the papers, but my lawyer, who had remained in the kitchen quietly, stepped into view. "Please don't touch those," he said. "We've already made digital copies. The originals are being logged for court proceedings." Victoria's face collapsed. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, "and so is the law." She turned to George. "You said this was done. You said she signed—" "She did. I thought she—" "I never signed anything willingly," I interrupted. "What I did do was prepare. Because I knew. You thought you could take my house, my life, my dignity. But I've lived through worse than you. I survived poverty, illness, heartbreak. You're just 2 ungrateful ghosts in a house that's no longer yours." The silence that followed was thick as snow. Victoria laughed, shrill. "You can't just kick us out." "I can," I said. "And I will." George sank onto the bottom step. "You're making a mistake." "No," I whispered. "You made the mistake. When you let her into our bed and thought I would break," Victoria tried again. "You're senile. You can't even remember half the—" "I remember enough to know betrayal when I see it, and I remember who paid for every brick in this house. Every inch was built with hands that worked double shifts, with knees that knelt to bathe a child, with eyes that wept when you didn't come home." George buried his face in his hands. Victoria stood frozen, fists clenched. "I'll see you in court," she hissed. "No," my lawyer said. "You'll receive a cease and desist. After that, perhaps an indictment." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" he said, and handed her a printed copy of the footage from the kitchen cam. She took it. Her hand trembled. The front door opened. The locksmith returned with the final key. I stood, took it, turned to them. "You'll leave tonight." "You don't mean that," George whispered. "I do," I said. "And if you don't, police will escort you." Victoria swore, stormed upstairs. George lingered. "You were my wife. I was your roof, your bed, your silence." Then I turned my back to him and faced the fire. By midnight, they were gone, and the house was mine again, not just in name, but in peace. The sun had not yet risen. Snowflakes still drifted, soft and slow, over the front lawn. The streetlights cast a dim glow on the sidewalk, illuminating the driveway like a stage waiting for actors to take their places. I stood in the kitchen in silence, my hands steady, my cardigan buttoned all the way up. The kettle hissed behind me. I did not turn it off. By the time I heard the first stirrings from upstairs, muffled voices, the creak of the bed frame, the sound of slippers against hardwood, the locksmith had already finished his work. Every lock in the house had been replaced. I handed him a tip folded inside a holiday envelope. He tipped his hat and said, "Ma'am, whatever they did, you handled it with class." The lawyer arrived moments later, his shoes crunching against the snow-covered porch. He carried a yellow envelope in one hand, a small metal box in the other. "Everything is ready," he said, stepping inside. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "They think they won. That's the part I want them to remember." He set the documents on the table and waited. I poured him a cup of tea. We sat in silence until the first shout echoed through the walls. "Mary?" George's voice, hoarse and confused. A door slammed upstairs. Then Victoria. "Why won't it open?" Another door, a pause. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. Then came the rattle of the front doorknob. "What the hell?" George barked. He banged his fist against the glass. "Mary, open this damn door!" I stayed seated. He spotted me through the window and pounded harder. "Why are the locks changed? Why are our things outside?" Outside, by the porch railing, were two plastic bins, one labeled George, the other Victoria. Each contained the bare essentials: wallets, phones, shoes, clothing, and a single printed letter placed on top. The letter outlined the events of the past 24 hours and explained that they were no longer welcome on the property, effective immediately, due to unlawful conduct and breach of trust. George read his lips moved as he scanned the words, slowly at first, then faster. His face turned beet red. "You think you can do this? You think you can just kick me out of my own house?" "It was never yours," I said calmly through the door's glass panel. He slammed his palm against the window. "I worked for this house." "No," I said. "You lived in it. I worked for it. I built it. I paid for it. I kept it warm in the winter and aired it in the spring. I scrubbed its floors and painted its walls. And when you couldn't find your socks or your pride, I found both." Victoria joined him at the door, her hair tangled, robe barely tied. "This is illegal," she screeched. "You can't just lock people out." My lawyer stepped into view. "She can," he said. "And she has, legally, lawfully, fully documented." Victoria lunged forward, yanking at the handle. "This is elder abuse!" I raised an eyebrow. "Coming from you, that's rich." George fumed. "Where are we supposed to go?" I held up the house key, the only one that now existed, and said clearly, "You should have asked that before you planned to steal what never belonged to you." He stepped back, stunned. Victoria kicked one of the bins, her voice rising, desperate. "We'll fight this. We'll go to court. You'll regret this." My lawyer pulled out a USB stick and held it up. "We have hours of footage, audio recordings, witness statements, forged documents, medical records, a notarized deed, and 2 affidavits. You can go to court, yes, but you won't like how it ends." George turned pale. Victoria looked at him, horrified. "You told me she was senile." "She was supposed to be," he muttered, eyes not meeting hers. I leaned in slightly. "You know, George, I always wondered what kind of man you'd become when temptation knocked. Turns out you answered before it even rang the bell." He looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw something resembling regret, but it passed. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I already did," Victoria scoffed. "You think you're noble? This is petty revenge from a bitter old woman." "No," I said quietly. "This is restoration, and I am not bitter. I am clear." I took a step back, closed the curtain. They stayed on the porch for another hour, shouting at times, pleading at others. Eventually they gathered their things and walked to George's old truck. The engine sputtered. It started, then stopped. Victoria threw something across the dashboard. I watched them drive away from the upstairs window. The house grew still again. Inside, the warmth returned. The quiet felt earned. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and poured it into my favorite mug. The one with chipped edges and a faded floral print George once said was too old-fashioned. I liked it that way. I sat in the living room and unfolded my knitting. The deed, now framed, sat on the mantel. Not out of pride, but as proof. I was not just someone's wife, or mother, or placeholder. I was the woman who remembered everything they tried to forget. I was the one who kept receipts when everyone thought I was too soft to matter. I just came back with the deed, the lawyer, and the locksmith. The files came faster than I expected. By Wednesday morning, I had a thick packet from the courthouse, Victoria's countersuit, full of vitriol and deception. It was titled Counterclaim for Wrongful Eviction, Emotional Distress, and Elder Abuse. I flipped through it in the lawyer's office, scanning the accusations like a vet inspecting a wound. She had claimed mental instability, wrongful deprivation of housing, and even defamation. The letter concluded with the demand for financial damages and immediate re-entry into the home. My lawyer sighed as he handed it back. "We anticipated this. Thankfully, all the assets are still legally in your name. They have no claim." I nodded. "Because George never transferred the property legally." He tapped the deed affixed to its file cover. "Exactly. And your evidence shows the signatures were forged, pressured, or prepared without capacity. Under Virginia law, this is financial exploitation of an elder, serious felony. Pino, 18.2, 100, and 78.2, code applies." They filed for a temporary restraining order immediately. That alone triggered a domino effect. Victoria's law license was suspended pending ethics review. Allegations of fraud and elder abuse had to be investigated. Her employer, an elite firm, placed her on immediate administrative leave. So much silence after that. I woke up free. George stayed with a friend for 2 nights and then moved into cheap motel just outside town. One night he called, voice thick with guilt. "Mary, I can come home, make this right." "Do not," I replied softly. "You made your choice. I will release you when I see you have taken responsibility." He didn't call again. Within a week, Victoria's suspension was in effect. Her license was revoked for at least 6 months, pending an ethics hearing. She had violated her fiduciary and professional duties, charging ahead with elder exploitation while suppressing evidence of my incapacity, my rights, and filing transfer documents falsely. Her firm quietly reassigned her cases. Local opposition formed quickly. Affluent families did not want an attorney with allegations of elder fraud on record. She remained under house arrest for a while, forced to surrender her badge, her business cards, her digital access to all client records. Alex came to me that Saturday afternoon, a mixture of shame and confusion in his eyes. He sat across from me at our old kitchen table, the one we'd shared Sunday breakfasts over, oatmeal and spilled juice. "Mom, I read everything," he started, voice breaking. "At first I thought, maybe you overreacted. I blamed you. I thought you were senile." He paused. "Now I know. And I'm sorry." I reached across and touched his hand. His knuckles were rough, strong. He stayed for dinner. He brought his suitcase. Later, he spoke to the lawyer, asking how he could help. The lawyer said best help would be emotional, rebuilding trust, restoring family. We cried together that night. But there were no recriminations, only relief. In the following weeks, the restraining order was approved. George and Victoria must stay 500 feet away from me and the property. The divorce between George and Victoria proceeded without my interference. They needed each other's testimonies. Victoria's countersuit was dismissed. The court found no legal basis, my property rights remained intact, and no fraudulent eviction had taken place. The judge's private concurrence referred to her document falsification and lack of capacity evidence as glaring examples of financial exploitation under Virginia Code 18.2, 178.2. One Saturday, I walked the property line with Alex. The snow glistened, footprints of birds and squirrels in the yard. The house stood silent, yet safe. We reached the garage and stood side by side. "I'll stay here," Alex said, "for now." I nodded, tears of gratitude in my eyes. That's all I ever wanted. We repainted the living room, replaced broken panels in the porch, moved the framed deed of title to sit above the mantel, not as a trophy, but a reminder. When visitors came, we talked about resilience and rights, not about scandal or blame. At church, I spoke to a small group, mostly older women, about protection, self-worth, responsibility. A minister asked if I believed in miracles. I said no. I believe in the law and in remembering. So here I am, weeks later. Snow still coats the yard. Victoria's face comes up in local gossip, her suspension extended indefinitely. The old man lives in solitude, a shadow of a once proud partner. My son is here again, rebuilding his roots. He speaks daily of forgiveness, not for what they did, but for what it took them to learn respect. When people ask, "What will you do with the house?" I smile. "It is where justice began," I say. They nod. Some still shake their heads, stunned by the calm justice of winter. No fanfare, no drama. Just facts, the deed, the law, and a mother's memory that refused to fade. I tell Alex the next day, "I am proud of you." He smiles, turns away, eyes glistening with something hopeful. Life goes on. But I remain the woman who was denied and then reclaimed everything. Not with anger, but with faith, preparation, and truth legally established. And on Christmas morning, I did not cry. I just reclaimed my life. It has been 1 year. 1 year since that Christmas morning, since the silence of betrayal broke like frost underfoot, and I walked back into the cold with nothing but truth in my hands. Now, as winter returns, I find myself moving slower, but stronger. I have repainted the house, soft sage green on the outside, warm terracotta in the kitchen. The guest room, the one where Victoria used to throw her handbags, is now my reading room. Books line the walls. Soft chairs soak up the light from the old window, and a tiny lamp glows by the window each evening like a heartbeat. A house, reborn. Each Sunday I bake, not just for myself, but for the little soup kitchen I started in the back of the church basement. We call it Warm Hands, Full Plates. Every Christmas now, instead of just watching carolers or setting out place cards, I roll dough and bake cookies for anyone who walks through the church door, homeless, widowed, wandering. There is always coffee, always warmth. The recipe is simple: flour, cinnamon, brown sugar, and a bit of clove. It is the same cookie Victoria once sniffed and said, "Ah, smells like old hands and poor kitchens." Now it smells like freedom. Alex brings Ethan every weekend. The boy is quiet with his mother's lashes but his father's smile. He carries a backpack full of plastic dinosaurs and asks endless questions about birds and clouds and where cookies go when they disappear. I teach him how to measure flour properly, how to stir without spilling. He wears a blue apron 2 sizes too big, and when he hugs me, he smells like vanilla and crayon. One Saturday, after our 4th batch of cookies, he turned to me and said, "Grandma, was my mommy mean to you?" I paused. The question hung in the air, heavy as snow. "She did not understand kindness," I replied. "But you do, and that is what matters." This year, on Christmas morning, I will not wear pearls or perfume. I will not sit quietly at a table where I am not welcome. Instead, I will be at the church early, tying on my apron, stirring a pot of lentil stew, while Ethan arranges candy canes beside the trays. Volunteers will come with their casseroles, their pies, their laughter. No one will be turned away. Everyone will be seen. It is not about charity, it is about dignity, about creating the kind of table I once wished someone had set for me. ___. That afternoon, the sun dipped early behind the hills, painting the little Virginia town in amber and frost. Alex and I were in the old district, picking up candles and pine garlands for the porch. The air was sharp with winter, but my hands were warm, holding a fresh bundle of green fur, still sticky with sap and scented with memory. We had just stepped out of the candle shop when Alex pointed to the car. You know, when I was a kid, I used to crawl into your trunk and pretend I was on a spaceship. Think you could let me drive you today, Mom? He said it like it was nothing, but my breath caught in my throat. He called me Mom, like he meant it. For the first time in years, I felt seen again, not just as the woman who cooked or cleaned or was tolerated, but as his mother, the one who raised him from bone and breath. We walked slowly toward the lot, smiling like we had time, but evil never leaves quietly. It comes screaming. I felt the light first, the blinding blaze of headlights charging from the opposite end of the parking lot, then the roar, tires skidding, a black SUV bearing down like a beast. "Mom, move!" Alex yelled, shoving me with everything he had. I fell hard, crashing into a snowbank. My back hit ice, but my eyes stayed fixed on the car, on the driver. Victoria. Her face, behind the windshield, was a portrait of chaos, wild eyes, streaked mascara, jaw clenched in rage. She did not slow, she did not hesitate. She meant to hit us, but the lot was slick with early frost. Her front wheels caught a patch of ice. The SUV veered left, wheels spinning, and smashed full force into the streetlight pole not 5 feet away. The sound was thunder. Glass exploded, metal bent like paper. The airbag inflated too late. Her head struck the steering wheel before her body crumpled back. And then, stillness. Complete, brutal stillness. Bystanders ran. Phones called 911. Someone screamed. But I just stood, slowly rising, brushing the snow from my coat. Alex stood beside me, silent. He reached for my hand, held it tight. We did not speak, we did not have to. 1 week later, an envelope arrived from the sheriff's office. Inside was a single-page statement. The crash had not been accidental. In the glove compartment, officers had found a handwritten letter. Half confession, half curse, she had written. That old witch stole everything from me, my husband, my son, my future. If I cannot have them, neither can she. But I had stolen nothing. I had simply taken back what I had built. With my own hands, my own years, my own blood and patience. That Christmas night, the house was quiet except for the gentle crackling of the fireplace. Outside, snow dusted the windows. Inside, cinnamon danced in the air. On the table sat a plate of cookies, gingerbread, sugared pecans, almond crescents. I had baked them with Ethan just that morning. His laugh still echoed in the kitchen tiles. He ran now, feet in fuzzy socks, bounding across the rug and into my arms. "Grandma," he squealed, climbing into my lap. "The tree's so pretty, but I like the scarf you made better. It's warm like home." I looked up at the tree. It shimmered with soft lights and hand-painted ornaments. The scent of clove and pine wrapped around us like a song. I kissed his forehead and pulled the scarf tighter around his little shoulders. I waited, I prepared, and when the moment came, I returned with the deed, the lawyer, and the locksmith. And God? God took care of the rest. And that's the end of my story. Not one I ever wanted to live, but one I survived. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember this. We don't need to scream to be heard. We just need to wait and remember who we are. If this story touched you or reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. I've got more to tell, more truths to share, and maybe, just maybe, one of them will be yours too. See you next time from my front porch, where memory never grows old.